Lisa. Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. It's good to see you all. It's the first Friday of the month, so you know what that means. It's time for Ask the Dietitian. Every month, we run a program here at Cancer Wellness Center called Ask the Dietitian, and we choose a topic, and then we allow our participants to ask their questions related to the topic. As an oncology dietitian, you can imagine I get a lot of questions, a lot. And so I love being able to give the opportunity to our participants to ask me questions. So we have a collection of questions today, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. We chose a very hot topic at this point in time. I hope you agree with me. And as you see on the slide, it's a giveaway. So Ask the Dietitian, it's all about food additives this month. And no surprise, we had a lot of great questions that I am going to try my best to answer today. What I think, and I put some images on this first slide for a reason, it seems like there's a lot of fear around food additives. And as an oncology dietitian, I just want to say, generally speaking, I feel like I'm in the business of taking away fear. I don't want anyone to be afraid of food. I want most and all, actually all of the people that I work with, I want them to feel comforted and reassured and confident and empowered that the foods that they are eating are helping themselves. So I want you to approach this presentation with that thought in mind. You know, how are the foods that I choose? Because there's hundreds of decisions that we can make, right? How are the decisions I'm making helping support myself? I think that approach and that attitude is so much more beneficial and less stressful because we don't need the extra stress, especially if we've been diagnosed with cancer and on treatment or recovering from treatment. I approached this presentation similarly. I had a lot of preconceived notions about food additives, and I learned a lot in preparation for this program. So my job as an oncology dietitian is to give information and to inform you. It's not really to change your mind about things unless I think it's something that should change because it's a harmful thought that you're having. But I learned a lot, and I want you to just keep an open mind to that because I'm just going to share with you what I've learned in preparation for this program. Now, you also see an image on the slide of Fruit Loops. Maybe you might recognize that bowl of cereal. And that's for a reason. I'm going to come back to it in one of my answers to the questions today. So thanks for joining us. We're going to get started right away because I have a lot of content to share as soon as the slides will let me advance. There we go. So on the agenda, I'm going to first give a little discussion about something called the Delaney clause, but then I'm going to answer each of the questions that were provided to us. And then at the end, I typically offer some additional resources and then also recipes to those of you who have registered for the program that will help you sort of apply this information that we learned today. All right, so I promised I'd talk about this, the Delaney clause. So back in 1958, that was a long time ago now, right? Congressman from New York, James Delaney proposed and Congress enacted into a law an amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that banned any synthetic chemical known to cause cancer in animals at any dose. So think of it as zero tolerance. So no matter how small the amount that was used in food, it could be teensy tiny amounts, but if that's not carcinogenic in teensy tiny amounts, it doesn't matter. If it can cause cancer on any level for animals, it cannot be used in food. That's the Delaney clause. And it's so important that you understand this because we're gonna come back to it. The reason why this clause happened at the time was back in 1958. There was Halloween candy that accidentally had too much of a color additive given to it, way too much. It was like an accident by the company that manufactured the Halloween candy, and several hundreds of children became sick. They're fine. They're fine today if they're still with us. But it was enough to sort of spark this attention that we need to be more careful and really take care and consideration over what is being added to our foods. So since that time, a lot has changed. Back in 1958, we didn't even really know what carcinogens were. We kind of had an idea, but we really didn't know. We've learned so much since that time. We also have a better way in terms of technology to detect the amounts that might be used in foods. We could only test like parts per thousand, but now we can detect parts per billion. So we can really decipher how safe or not our food is because those teensy tiny doses are probably not enough to cause an issue. And we're going to talk more about that today. Another important concept related to the Delaney clause is that a hazard does not equal a risk, and that the dose makes the poison as it seems. I'm going to talk more about that. A good example or a good analogy to give you about that is think about your prescription medications. They work at a certain dose, but what happens if you take too much of it, right? What happens if you don't take enough of it? So think about it in that way. That's sort of how we want to approach our food additives as well. So let's go to those questions. Okay, so what are food additives and how damaging are they, right? So right off the bat, we're hearing like, I'm afraid of food additives. They're damaging, right? And then I also lumped in this question because I think it matters in terms of the answer. Is any amount of additives bad, or is it a cumulative effect? So food additives are any substance used in the production, processing, treatment, storage, packaging, or transportation of food. There's two types. It could be direct or indirect. So the direct additives are ingredients used in food or beverages for a specified purpose. They are required to be labeled within the ingredients, so we have a right to know that. Now, there are indirect additives, which I just want to share this. I couldn't share any more about this, but apparently there's indirect additives, which sort of makes sense. So those are substances that become part of a food or beverage due to contact methods of packaging or storage, unintentional addition, or other handling, right? So it's not like we intentionally put the additives there. They just showed up along the way, probably because of the processing. They're used for a variety of reasons, as you can imagine. Food additives act to be preservatives. They add color, they add flavor, they stabilize food. So think of something like salad dressing or emulsifiers do the same. And then there's also nutritional fortifiers that are additives, technically. Now, without food additives, our modern day food supply chain would have products with a short shelf life and rapid flavor loss. So that's good to know. I think it's afforded us some really helpful products, and that can really only be determined on a case-by-case basis when you work with a dietitian, what choices are best for you. It's too much really to cover in my talk today. Now, consumer demand over the years, especially more recently, has led to the expansion of natural and organic additives. Because there's a demand for it, food companies are happy to try to develop these types of additives and implement them more in our food supply. But there's also been examples in our not so distant past where the public demanded that a product doesn't change, despite maybe the initial thought that natural or organic is better. And I promised I would talk about Fruit Loops. So the images of the Fruit Loops you see here on the right are the Fruit Loops that we can find here in the US. And on the left, those are Canada's Fruit Loops. So I hope you see there's a dramatic difference between the colors, right? Now, back in, I believe it was 2018, 2018, I believe, there was a little bit of consumer demand that, hey, could we maybe not make such bright, vibrant Fruit Loops? Maybe they could be colored a little differently. And the food company did that, and they changed the color. I don't know if anyone is aware of this or remember this at that time. So they did, and they changed them to look more like the Canadian option on the left. And then there was like this backlash, and the public demanded that Fruit Loops go back to their original color. So it's very interesting, I think, trying to satisfy everybody. I think it's not going to be possible. But what's nice to know is that we have options. And again, working with a dietitian can help you explore what those options are. We don't have to buy those Fruit Loops if we don't want them, right? We can choose something else. But a very interesting just piece to share about our history and of food additives. Now, it is, basically the responsibility of the governing agencies in this country to review and evaluate our additives to make sure that the use of them is beneficial, that it's going to far outweigh any potential risk. And that's always been the approach in terms of our food system. There's some myths about food additives, and that's what I wanted to share. And I think it really confirmed for me what some of my thoughts and concerns were about food additives. So I just wanted to share them with you as well. So all additives are synthetic and harmful. No, that's not true. The FDA considers all additives for color, especially, to technically be synthetic. So for example, they might extract anthocyanin, which is a phytochemical. That's what gives berries, like raspberries and blackberries. That's what gives it that color. They may use that color from those berries as a food dye. Did you know that? But they technically have to call that synthetic. Right? So it's really interesting, I think, as we dig deeper into this. Ascorbic acid, or that's its scientific name, or vitamin C, it's commonly used as an antioxidant to preserve food. And hopefully you all agree, like vitamin C is not harmful in any form, right? Unless we take too much of it. That's where it becomes a concern. Food additives lead to serious health issues. No, we don't think so. And we haven't seen that. We would have known by now. Extensive research and regulatory oversight have demonstrated that approved additives are safe as long as they're used within permitted levels, right? Sometimes, as the reason for the deleting clause, that was a great example. Too much. The dose was the issue in that case. So going back to that deleting clause, any substance in any amount that causes cancer in a man, that's part of the definition, not in a woman necessarily, but in a man or an animal cannot be used. So think of it as zero tolerance, right? So if there's any thought that this could be a problem, according to the Delaney clause, a food company cannot use it. Now, food additives, another myth, food without additives are always a healthier choice. I don't know about that either. So vitamin D fortified milk is a great example, or other fortified products, vitamin B enriched products. They may be very valuable additions to an overall healthy diet. There's a myth that additives are chemicals and chemicals are bad. That's a whole nother discussion because that's not true necessarily. Regulatory authorities require scientifically accurate nomenclature on ingredient labels. As a result, there are ingredients that the public may not necessarily understand. So for example, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folic acid are really just fancy names for some of our B vitamins. In the EU, they use this nomenclature E300 for vitamin C, which I think is unfortunate. Like that makes it sound like it is something that's not necessarily safe for us. E300, what is that, right? So just a little summary. So many of our additives have been used in our food supply for over 100 years, while some have been removed over time because of questionable safety. And the approach to their safety is a matter of risk versus hazard. So hazard has the potential for harm in any amount, whereas the risk has the potential for harm at a determined and set amount. And that's the way the US approaches our food supply. It's based upon risk. In other words, it's the dose that matters for the concern. Combining both of these thoughts, oh, sorry. I moved too fast there. So in other words, too much added sugar may lead to weight gain. Too much added salt may lead to high blood pressure eventually, right? That's the risk that we're talking about. And that's the same way we want to think about food additives. It's the how much. Little amounts here and there are not going to be harmful, especially if we think about what else we're doing in our lifestyle as well. And the other thought I want to just also share is that additives are not like chemicals in our environment, right? That are toxic at any amount, right? So if we're exposed to cyanide, this is a problem. It's not like too much cyanide is a problem. Any amount is a problem. That's not the way additives work, okay? So I think like this concept of clean eating applies here. Like if we think we eat cleanly, we don't eat food additives, right? So we may feel this external pressure, especially if we're looking online or we're being exposed to social media influencers who are trying to make us afraid of things. They may make us feel like we're only supposed to consume fresh and unprocessed foods. And for some of us, that may be possible. Sure, right? But for the rest of us, the reality is that we need certain additives in order to ensure safe, acceptable, and available food. And combining the two will likely support our health goals. We ultimately decide what foods to eat. And as a dietitian, I will always advocate and respect your autonomy to make that decision. And I can help guide you towards that, right? So if you decide, I don't want to have these additives in my diet, well, sure, then we could work together on that. But my job and responsibility is to give you information about that in order to make the best decision you can for yourself. So you get to decide, right? But ultimately, it is also true that we do not need to be afraid of additives. They don't seem to pose a significant health risk. Worry about harm of food additives is oversimplifying a very complicated, complex issue. It's even above my head, and I have a little bit of an understanding of this stuff. So concern over food additives means we can't see the forest for the trees. There may be many other ways based on concrete evidence that we can help ourselves. And we don't want to dismiss that. We don't want to forget about that. We want to really prioritize that. That's the most important thing that we can do for ourselves. And again, working with a dietitian can help reassure you that you're on the right path for that. I love that someone asked this next question. There are some additives that are banned in Europe, but not in the US. Why is that? I love that someone asked that question. All right, so the United States and the European Union use different frameworks, and that's what really results in different conclusions for the same potential ingredient, right? That's why some might be banned here, some banned there. It really gets interesting. So I'm going to try to explain that for you. Besides the EU, other countries around the world like Australia, Canada, they all use different frameworks in terms of their scientific method to determine if a food is safe or not for our consumption. Much of the information about food additives being banned in Europe versus the US is misinformation. So I want to just ask you to do me a favor. Anytime you hear something along those lines, is that person trying to scare you? Do they have some other objective? But just pause for a minute, because if they're making a comparison about foods we eat here versus another country, just pause. That's all I want you to do. Pause. And then you can ask me about it. And we can talk more specifically about that source of that information, which could potentially be misinformation. Chances are it is. There's a lot of influencers, as I've shared, they're trying to really create hysteria, right? Because they're evoking fear and distrust. And ultimately, they are gaining from it because they're getting our attention, they're potentially profiting from it. In the EU, this is a really good example, red dye number 3, which we're going to talk about today. Red dye number 3, which happens to be called E127 in the EU, it's allowed for use. So we recently banned that. Hopefully you're aware of that. We're going to talk about that. But it's still in the food supply over in the European Union. Did you know that? So I was really I wanted to share that because I think it just sort of sums up the answer to this question. Now, we recently banned red dye number 3. So there are 9 synthetic food dyes, to expand on this, that are permitted in the US, while 11 are permitted in the EU. The US has more strict regulations around a handful of food dyes compared to the EU. You may also have heard that wheat thins, and I saw this recently too, like wheat thins are banned in the EU. And they say that BHT is the reason for the ban, but that's not true. In the EU, they don't ban BHT. They allow a smaller amount than we do here, but it's such an insignificant difference, right? So that's also a myth that you might have seen. There are several other examples, but most likely the conversation about food additives here compared to anywhere else in the world does not go into the depth of how it all works. It's all very complicated, and it's for good reason. It's working for whoever the governing agency is. And I think anytime someone sort of oversimplifies that type of complex information isn't really giving its due diligence in terms of all the information you need to know about it. So this isn't recent, because what you'll see in the US red dye is available here and not banned. But this, I just wanted to show you in the EU compared to the US, compared to Japan, compared to India, compared to China. Here's all the different synthetic food dyes that are available. So, where do we rank according to other countries in the world? I think you'll see like that we're not far off. We're sort of just in there, all in this together, like trying to just understand what amounts and what works for that country's or in the European Union, what works for the food supply for that area of the world, right? But I just wanted to share this as a comparison, that it's not like we allow so many different food dyes that no one else does, right? That's not the truth. So the precautionary principle, if you haven't heard of that, that's the idea that we are morally bound to ensure that our actions will not cause significant harm, or that the benefits of our activities outweigh any risk. Another way of saying that is that if there's any scientific possibility that something could happen, but risk analysis haven't proved that it will happen, that we should just play it safe, right? And we should just wait until scientifically we can prove it is safe. So if we think about this as it applies to additives or ingredients, some regulatory agencies will say, we need to show that this is proven to be safe and we're not going to use it. If there's any concern at all that something could be a problem, we're not going to use it. And that's the way the EU approaches their ingredients. The US uses a little bit more science, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. So the US bases decisions on ingredient safety using an in-depth risk analysis. Again, the risk, not the hazard, the risk. So if there's a potential for harm, we just want to know, researchers have to show how, when, in what form, and at what levels that harm occurs, right? That's really kind of taking it a little step further in terms of understanding more about the potential for the harm, right? Whereas in the EU, they don't even take it to that. They just think there's a harm, forget it. We don't even want to know anything more else about it, right? So ingredients are approved and regulated after that's done and after they apply the precautionary principle, meaning if there's any doubt, we're not allowing it. In the EU, an ingredient will not be accepted if there is any suspicion it could cause harm. So I just want to share, and I think sharing some of these examples in our history is helpful to understanding again how complicated all of this is, and just to help create a little less hysteria and a little bit more reassurance that it's okay, we're doing okay, right? So the history of stevia. Have you heard of stevia? It's a shrub native to South America, and in 1901, it was discovered by an Italian-Swiss botanist to have a sweet taste, and he thought, ooh, let's use this in food. So compounds in the stevia plant, there's all these different compounds, and they have a range in terms of their sweetness to be 50 times sweeter than sugar, all the way up to 450 times sweeter than sugar, which is wild to me. So for decades, since that time, pure stevia extracts were approved for use in Japan. In both the US and the EU, it rejected the use of stevia until the 90s. Well, actually, even in the 90s, there were concerns about infertility in rats. So what happened that in terms of the research, which is again only animal studies, fewer and smaller offspring they found in those pregnant hamsters that were fed very large amounts of stevia. I think that's awful, those poor hamsters. In the 2000s, a food company probably made a lot of profit off of this. They developed a highly purified version of stevia. So they were able to figure out, how do we get all these different compounds in stevia? How do we highly purify it and have it in such a small dose of what this compound that they were concerned about causing infertility about? So this was really exciting. And because of that discovery and that development of that highly purified version of stevia, in 2008, FDA approved its use. And in 2010, the EU said, okay, we'll let you use it too. So in both, so that just sort of paints a historical timeline of how we operate, how the EU operates, and how, we sort of came to the same conclusion about stevia, right? So where do we stand now? Risk evaluations are not one and done. In the US, new risk analyses ensure that ingredients still comply with their current safety standards. We may learn things as we go, and that's been part of our food additive history. Some products have been removed from the market as soon as there is any concern. They reevaluate. They may reinvestigate if there's an unanticipated harmful impact that has been shown. So what a lot of our food scientists say, and a lot of the experts who have the knowledge and expertise about all of this information, they say they need to do a little bit more work. Maybe it's not us, but they need to do a little bit more work in terms of the way that they communicate all this. It's a lot of complicated science, and it's probably too much for the lay public to understand. They would like to support the idea of improving media literacy. So a lot of times journalists, and this is the case for nutrition research as well, journalists and lay media they're just not qualified to interpret findings of a research study, and they shouldn't be, right? And they often report very sensationalized and oversimplified concepts that and they don't put it into context of everything else we know about the topic, unfortunately. So that's why there's a lot of confusion. And then we think that they also definitely should increase transparency about how decisions are made for food additives. I definitely would like to see that as well. Okay, moving along, we got this. All right, so which additives should you be especially mindful of avoiding? Are any considered acceptable? So I would say this is me sort of taking a stance of if you really want to be safe and cautious, this would be on my list. Again, I think in a one-on-one conversation, it might look differently, but because I'm asked the question and because I'm answering it to a broad audience, this is my answer, right? So I'm going to make sure I'm covering everybody's needs and making sure that we're really being careful here, if that's what your concern is, right? It's in terms of asking this question. So titanium dioxide, it's a synthetic white pigment used as a color additive. And at this point in time, the FDA is reviewing a petition. It was filed in I believe it was 2022. It might have been 2023, but the EU banned the use of titanium dioxide in 2022, just for your information. And the European Food Safety Agency, that's sort of their governing body in the EU that makes these decisions, they concluded that food grade titanium dioxide was no longer safe because of concerns that very small particles, which are called nanoparticles, could accumulate in the body and damage DNA. We don't know about how much, and and to who, just in animals, just to us. So they said, because there's any concern at all, forget it. It's gone. We're not allowed to use it. Now, in 2023, the Joint Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations and the World Health Organization Expert Committee on Food Additives concluded that titanium dioxide, when added to food, is safe. Okay, so that's a completely different governing body. So just for your information to know, there's some disagreement here, right, about this additive. Other international regulatory bodies, including the United Kingdom's Food Safety Agency, Health Canada, and Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, have not agreed with the EU EFSA's assessment. Okay, so there's, again, some debate about this particular additive. We here in this country, according to the FDA, consider it safe to consume as long as the amount does not exceed 1% of the weight of the food. There is no direct proof that titanium dioxide causes cancer, but the nanoparticles are what some people right now are arguing and why that petition was filed. We need to know more about the nanoparticles. And until we know more, maybe it should be banned. And that's what the EU is doing, right? So just for your information, titanium dioxide is found in things like baked goods, chewing gum, chocolate, puddings, hard candies, frostings, dressings, and sauces. You'll see it on a label. And so again, it's something that if you're concerned about, and maybe you eat a lot of these foods that you see on the slide, it might be something that's worth your while, but also pay attention because the FDA is reviewing this petition and we should have an answer sooner or later about whether or not we feel like this additive is safe based on the fact that the nanoparticles are what are a concern. All right, next additive, very popular one at the moment, right? Red dye number 3. It's a synthetic food coloring that gives bright red or pink color to products. Really bright, by the way, very vibrantly bright. It was banned from use in cosmetics during the 90s, and it was set to be removed from food shortly after. However, due to a lack of resources, the FDA was unable to take action. You'd have to ask what happened back then. I'm not sure. So on January 15th, unless you've been hiding under a rock, the FDA issued a ban, and now red dye number 3 is banned from food as well as ingested drugs, because we want to also keep that in mind, as well as some potentially over-the-counter products, like I think of cough syrup. We find some of these additives in a lot of places, right, besides food. So now they're banned from use, and this is all based on the Delaney clause. The FDA ban stems from a petition back in 2022 that indicated that there were 2 studies where male rats were exposed to very high levels and developed tumors. So again, according to that Delaney clause, if there's any amount that causes a tumor in an animal, we can't use it. That's the Delaney clause. There is a specific hormonal mechanism in male rats only. So they didn't find that female rats develop tumors. But there's a specific hormonal mechanism in male rats, not in female rats, and also humans do not have this hormonal mechanism that they think is the reason why male rats only develop the tumors. So you see how complicated it gets, right? And probably a little bit more to the story that we need to know. But again, because of the Delaney clause, they banned it. So in a statement by the FDA, that even though they banned it, they said that claims that use in food and ingested drugs puts people at risk are not supported by the available scientific evidence. They don't think that because male rats, because of that specific hormonal mechanism, got tumors, that that's good enough for us to ban it. But again, because of that Delaney clause, they have to follow the law. So red dye number 3 will likely remain in many of our products for several more years. Companies have until January 15th of 2027 to remove it. I think a lot of companies are already in the process of doing it because they know they have to eventually do it anyway, but you can look for it on labels and see if you find it. Again, in a lot of, think bright red, bright pink. And if you're eating it or ingesting it in drugs or over-the-counter products, it might have red dye in it, right? So think about that as it relates to some of the things that we find it in. All right, next, I just wanted to share a little bit more about food additives and colors. A lot of them use synthetic petroleum-based chemicals. So some other food colors that some experts argue should also be considered for banning are listed here. And I was like, what is the difference between blue number 1 and blue number 2? I'm just so curious. So this is the actual chemical structure of it and the name of it used. And you could see like the difference between blue and indigo, I guess. But I just shared that just as an aside, just if you were interested. But some of our food experts are saying, or our scientists are saying, maybe we should ban these as well, because these food colors have been linked mostly with hypersensitivity reactions. That's the strongest level of evidence. But there is some other research based, again, only in animals where there was a risk for cancer, damage to the liver and bile duct, and hyperactivity in children. So that's obviously not in animal studies, but that's the concerning link. And so if you feel like these are things, these colors that you want to avoid as well, you can look for them on your food labels. I would say, like, just recognize they typically are found in candies and sweet beverages, pet food, and sausage for some reason. If those are foods that you eat, you can check and you can compare and maybe choose another version of it. Or a good rule of thumb is that if you want to limit foods that really are vibrantly colored, I would tend to support that because they tend to not be in foods that are very nutritious for us anyway, right? So I just want you to think about that as a very helpful step in a direction that will improve the nutrition in your diet anyway. All right, next food additive. I'm just going to use the acronym ADC. It's a whitening agent, and it's used and it's a dough conditioner, for bread and bread products. So it's also used to make rubber and plastic products, by the way. It's banned for use in food products in the EU, and it's banned from plastics that are in contact with food. And that was based on reports of inducing asthma for those employees who worked in places where it was manufactured or handled. So they got exposed to very, very high amounts of this compound. The concern is about the breakdown product of ADC, which is SEM and urethane. At high levels, SEM has been shown to increase the incidence of tumors when fed to female mice, but not to male mice or to rats, either sex of rats. So again, because of that, the EU says we're not going to let this be used in our country. So these studies were conducted in rodents at levels of SEM that far exceed what we typically consume from our treated flour or bread products. There actually also are not many breads today that use ADC. That's my understanding. So again, we can look at our bread products, we can call companies and ask them and see if they're using this. But this is partly why the FDA considers it safe because of, again, that dosage amount. But a lot of advocates are saying, just like red dye number 3, and according to that Delaney cause, we should be banning it as well because of what there's this evidence that it causes these tumors in female mice. Good to know. Okay, next one. Brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, brominated, sorry. It's used in citrus beverages to prevent separation. Research suggests that BVO might be concerning to those who drink very large amounts, and there were 2 case reports of bromine toxicity in people that were drinking more than 2 liters of products that had BVO in it every day. So in July 2024, the FDA banned BVO because of research that indicated high levels of BVO in rats caused thyroid dysfunction. So most companies have since replaced BVO, but with alternatives, but manufacturers have until August of this year to comply with that ban. So another banned additive. It's found in sodas and sports drinks that are citrus flavored. So again, like if that's something that you're using regularly and you want to just check, you can take a look and call the company. You can ask me, I can help you investigate further. might be something that we need to eventually eliminate anyway, but maybe now's the time as well. Okay, next one, potassium bromate. It's used in flour to strengthen dough and improve elasticity. It's banned in the EU. Here in the FDA reports that they work very closely with the American Bakers Association to ensure that only safe amounts are used in our baking goods or baked goods. Animal studies have found it may be a carcinogen and linked with kidney and thyroid cancer. The amount given to mice in those studies were significantly higher than what we eat today. Most bromate breaks down in the body and it kind of transforms into a safe compound, not harmful at all. It's called bromide. However, there might be lingering tiny amounts that are left. We don't know, right? So is that something also to consider avoiding? And I think like I could see also too, the advocates saying, hey, we need to apply the Delaney clause here for potassium bromate. Next, BHA. It's an antioxidant. It's used as a preservative, especially in very highly processed foods. Research suggests that it causes cancer in rats, mice, and hamsters. And this is controversial because the animals developed cancer in an organ that we don't have, the forestomach. So proponents for banning its use argue that it's a carcinogen because it caused cancer in 3 different species. So that should be an argument enough that we shouldn't have it in our food. So where do we find BHA? It's in potato chips, other baked goods, and preserved meat, right? So another one that maybe time will tell if the FDA will act upon this as well. So another one to kind of be on the lookout for. That's the short list of those additives. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. What does it mean when food labels say natural flavoring? Can this indicate other hidden ingredients? What a great question. So natural flavors are defined by the FDA in this way. I'm not going to read through it all, but basically it's all these different potential options that are found in nature, like roots and leaves, but also are some of our animal products, and it's a derivative of some sort of type of one of those things. And it could be also a fermentation product of one of those things. Its job in food is just for flavor. It doesn't impart any type of nutrition at all. So the goal is to enhance sensory experience, right? So right off the bat, that makes me think this food is probably very highly processed. If they're trying to enhance the sensory experience, they're trying to really make it zing our taste buds, right? So really though, it's a blanket term used for hundreds of different additives, these natural flavors. So if a flavor comes from one of the following, it's natural. So here you have it here. And again, I look at these and I think, no big deal, right? These are things that we find in nature and probably would otherwise regularly be eating, right? It's simply present to enhance the flavors of foods. It doesn't add calories or nutrients. So there's nothing else hidden, right, in these natural flavors. I think that's a great question, though. Manufacturers are allowed to list natural flavor because manufacturers have to, they're required to, but they can kind of disguise their own proprietary recipe, which is unique to them and affords them a profit, and they don't want anyone else copying off of their recipes. So they use natural flavors to kind of disguise that. And I think that that's really the gist of why they use natural flavors in the way that they do. If we want to, again, we can always contact the product manufacturer directly to better understand what's in the product. Because this makes me think of allergens. Like, I think we have a right to know what's in our food, right? So I think we, when we push back and when we ask for these things, we have a chance to be able to know for ourselves and then decide whether or not it's a good choice for ourselves. These natural flavors do tend to be present in highly processed foods, right? So I think right off the top of my head, like a cream of mushroom soup. I think like that's one example I read. They add a natural flavor to it to make the mushroom soup taste more mushroomy. When do we really need that? I don't know. But is a can of mushroom soup the worst thing we can have? No. But could we have other things? Sure. Yeah, sure. There's other things that are more nutritious. But when we focus on minimally processed whole foods, most of the time, we're going to increase our consumption of nourishing foods while decreasing the consumption of these other flavors, especially our natural and artificial flavors. I see we're right at time, and I have about 20 more slides to get through. So I think what that means is we're going to do a part 2 for this Ask the Dietitian this month. I think it's such a great topic that I didn't want to have to trim any of the content that I shared. So if Lisa agrees, I think we'll end it here.